The voices of women is hardly heard in medieval historical sources. When we do hear the voices, it is in most cases from an indirect sources by a male third party to whom they are subordinate. A father, a husband, a brother, family member, or a government official. Therefore, any source in which we can hear the women speak in their own voice is precious. Luckily, we do have one such rich source from the Muslim lands in the Mediterranean basin. This source is the Cairo Geniza, which makes it possible to us to have a glimpse into the daily lives of the people that used to live in this area. Although the Geniza covers around 1,000 years, the majority of the documents are dated between 10th and 13th centuries AD. Letters, contracts, and other material found in the Geniza enables us to touch almost intimately the average person in his daily life, his thoughts, business, married life, etc. Sometimes we can even touch letters that were written by women, either by themselves or by a scribe to whom they dictated the words. Women's voice can be heard not only from the letters. Another important source are the legal documents, in which legal issues involving women were written down in court. But we are interested in converse and conversion, and the Geniza is a great source for such a material. The three sources that will be presented here are all dealing with the conversion of women to Judaism. Two of the sources bring us the women's voices themselves, while the other remaining source, the woman is silent, and all we know is that she was converted.
Let us move to the sources. The first document is a court record written in Hebrew. Unfortunately, we don't know where and when it was written, but it is most likely that it was produced around the 11th to the 12th century in one of the Rabbinite or Karaite communities in the Mediterranean basin. Professor Mordechai Akiva Friedman, who was the only scholar to publish this unique source, suggested it was written in Spain. This assumption is plausible, although there is no strict evidence for it. This is a remarkable source. Two Christian sisters arrived to the Jewish court with a very unique demand to leave their former religion and join Judaism. And they both cried and begged us, "You should know, our rabbis, that we wish to enter the congregation of Israel, to be part of your congregation and leave our previous congregation, and not to worship idols and graven images. We wish to be part of your belief, to worship God alone, and to take upon ourselves the yoke of the kingdom of heaven and the yoke of the commandments, as do all the rightful and pure daughters of Israel." The court response is surprising. They express their amazement for the fact that the two sisters are so eager to become Jews and are trying to convince them to change their minds. "Be aware, our sisters, that you will not be able to join us to the congregation of Israel, for it is harsh, and we are suffering the burden of the Gentiles. You cannot tolerate all these conditions, so it will be better for you to stay with your brothers and people." Nonetheless, the court also questioned if lack of resources forced the sisters to join the Jewish community, and agreed to support them in any case. "And if you cannot support yourselves, we will take care for all your needs, and we will support you as much as we can." But the two sisters denied that their aim was to gain profit or financial support, and expressed their pure intentions. "Our rabbis, please lift up your eyes on high for us and have mercy on us, because not every day we encounter Hebrew people in this place. And now, when God summoned you, we are begging you to help us and fulfill our wish, and we are not lacking anything." The same reasoning is found in another Geniza document, probably from the 13th century, which was written by a woman who wished to become a Jew, and was probably sent to the head of the Jews in Egypt. "I do not desecrate any holiday or Sabbath, and wish to die in the Jewish religion, which I hope to embrace during your splendorous days. It is not for a dinar or a dirham that I have taken the trouble to move to a foreign place." Is it a pure coincidence that in both cases the women's motivation for converting was questioned? Did women tend to convert due to economic reasons? We cannot tell, but it seems that this notion was eminent, and the Jewish authorities tried to get to the bottom of the story to make sure that the prospect of conversion is due to a pure cause. Let's now return to our two sisters. We left them when the court cast a doubt on their pure intention to become Jewish and wondered whether there is an economic reason for this move. After the two sisters denied they had any economical reasons for converting, they implied a threat to the court, saying that if their desire would not be fulfilled, they would submit a complaint to heaven. This threat did the job, and the court agreed, but mentioned that the commandments and prohibitions required by Jewish law, an act required by the Talmud, in order to discourage prospective proselytes. When the sisters expressed again their willingness and pure intentions, the court started the detailed process of conversion. Now, the process is described here in details not found in any other historical source from this period or later. The process includes clipping of the nails and shaving of the hair. Then we instructed them to shave their heads and clip their nails, and they whined in grief for having committed idol worship and said, "Our ancestors possessed nothing but false gods, worthless idols that did them no good." And they immersed themselves according to the requirements of Jewish law, and we cite to them Shema Yisrael. The process ends successfully, but the story turns into a Hollywood-style love tale. A man who was present at the court after seeing the whole process was so amazed that he asked the court to let him marry one of the two sisters. Here the story ends, but it seems that one of the sisters did get married with this good-hearted man, only after the court demanded that he would take upon himself to help her return to her country of origin, if they would divorce each other. By this act, the court shows its responsibility for the welfare of these converts. The second document that we've already dealt with in short, about the woman from Advich, also requires attention. The text was translated by S.D. Goiten as follows. "They said to me, 'Go up to Advich. There are Jews. They will proselytize you.' Thus your maidservant travelled to Advich, went to the Jews, and made an appeal to the community. They replied, 'We cannot act except upon the written instruction of the Nagid. Therefore, your maidservant comes to your auspicious gate and throws herself on God and on you, entreating you by your faith in God not to dash my hopes. Do not leave me in the lurch, for I would not have undertaken this travel, for I have nowhere to turn except to the gate of God, and yours, had I not been confident about this matter.'" In this case, we can see the same suspicion of the Jewish community towards the pure intention of the prospective woman to convert. Here the community cannot cope with the issue alone, and they are asking the woman to appeal to the head of the Jews, perhaps as a deliberate act to dissuade her from taking the step. But this woman knows exactly what she wants, and she is applying to the Jewish leader itself. This act can be compared to an appeal made by an average person to the head of state today. As commonly in the Genisa, we have no further details here. We don't know the head of the Jews took any action regarding this appeal, and the outcome of this brave woman remains a mystery. In the last two documents, we encountered self-active women. The last document represents a completely different story. Here, the woman's voice is unheard, and she is a subject to decisions made for her by others. Abraham ibn Yiju, a Tunisian Jewish merchant who was involved in the India trade, arrived to the Malabar coast in western India and decided to settle and conduct his business from there. His story can be heard from dozens of documents found in the Genisa and published by S.D. Goiten and Mordechai Akiva Friedman, which we will use extensively here. He was also the hero of a novel by Amitav Ghosh, In an Antique Land. As a young Jewish bachelor, Abraham had a hard time finding a Jewish woman to marry. Apparently, he was the only Jew around. So, where could he find a Jewish lady to marry? To answer this question, we need to delve into the Genísa documents and follow his actions. A few months after the estimated date of his arrival in India, Ben-Yiju bought and liberated an Indian slave girl and wrote her a deed of manumission. It is inconceivable that a young Jewish merchant, having just landed in India, would have immediately purchased a handmaiden for good money and liberated her for purely altruistic reasons. The conjecture that Ben-Yiju, after buying the girl and liberating her, then made her his wife, cannot be far from the truth. Indeed, in all likelihood, this was his original intention. A manumitted slave girl becomes a Jewess, that is, a proselyte in all respects. In the deed, Ben-Yiju calls his slave Ashu, the slave girl, the proselyte. Even before writing the manumission formula, he was presumably following the ruling that a female slave had the status of a proselyte even before receiving her freedom, if her owner had subjected her to the halachically required ritual immersion for servitude. When he liberated her, he gave her a Jewish name, Baracha, daughter of Abraham, referring, of course, to the patriarch Abraham, who is considered the father of all converts to Judaism. The story does not end here, though. 2 sons and a daughter were born to him in India. Their mother was presumably his freed slave, Ashu. Ben-Yiju and his family stayed for more than 20 years in India. Then he decided to leave India and unite with his brothers and sister. Ben-Yiju, his wife and kids set sail to Aden on the way to the west. It appears that not all the Jews of Yemen and Aden received Avraham Ben-Yiju favourably. Some of them presumably deplored his marriage to his freed slave and were dubious as to her status and that of his Indian Jewish children. The disapproval of his actions is implied in 4 responses written by Ben-Yiju, in all probability while he was living in Yemen, about a certain Reuben who had betrothed a slave girl in India and to a man who had begotten a son and a daughter from an emancipated slave girl. It now seems likely that Reuben was simply a code for Ben-Yiju himself, and the wife and children in question were his own. Reuben's, or as we conjecture, Ben-Yiju's detractors, held that he was obliged to divorce his slave wife and betroth her a second time, since the first betrothal may have been invalid, having been solemnized before she had converted to Judaism. Even was he willing to divorce her and betroth her again, he might still be prohibited from living with her, as is ruled in the Mishnah. Furthermore, they argued, the son that his slave had borne him was not eligible to inherit him. The ruling in the response that a man's son from a manumitted slave girl may inherit seems simple. However, it may not be a coincidence that the respondent forgot to point out the necessary condition for this to occur, namely, that the son had been conceived only after his mother's manumission. But that is not all. The responser states that Reuben himself admitted to having betrothed the handmaiden before freeing her by way of a conditional betrothal. The respondent rules that such conditional betrothal of a slave girl is retroactively valid after she is liberated, citing the Mishnah Kiddushim 3:5. If one says to a woman, "Behold, you are betrothed to me," after you are liberated, she is betrothed. The trouble is that all known manuscripts of the Mishnah and the Talmud read here, she is not betrothed. Here again, we have no clue what was happening in the Adenese community regarding Ben-Yiju and his children. Abraham himself left Aden and resided for a few years in Inner Yemen. We do not know why he chose to leave Aden, whether because of his enemies' slander or for some other reason. Whatever the case may be, he was received with much honour in the interior. Ben-Yiju's young daughter, Sit al-Dar, lived for 3 years in the home of a distinguished Adenese merchant and was engaged to his son, which might suggest that he did not see her Indian lineage as a problem. The cynical might say that it was thanks to the fortune that she brought with her. Eventually, Ben-Yiju cancelled the engagement and engaged her to his nephew, Parachiah, who later became a member of Maimonides' court in Egypt, which completed the integration of Ben Iju's half-Indian daughter to the Jewish society. This story represents a forced conversion of a woman to Judaism. She was bought as a slave girl and was manumitted without asking her consent. Is it really forced conversion? If she had a chance to choose, would she prefer to remain a slave girl or a free Jewish woman who is married to a wealthy businessman? We will never know. The story also confronts us with the reaction of some members of the Jewish community in Yemen, who seem not to accept this new convert into the Jewish society, and question also the legitimacy of the children as proper Jews.